On April 6, 1862, the Union Bluecoats met the Southern Grays at the Battle of Shiloh. For the next 2 days, they proceeded to kill each other until, when the battle finally ended, 23,746 lay dead. Another 16,420 lay wounded throughout the woods and ravines of the battle. On the night of the 6th, a freezing rain started, and those wounded who could not move out on their own shivered through 2 or more nights and days of the cold rain, hoping for help, but waiting to die. The sheer numbers of the wounded and the limited medical personnel resulted in some of the wounded waiting days for even the most basic first aid. When the medics and doctors finally reached them, they stood in wonderment at an eerie bluish light glowing in the darkness all across the fields and woods where the wounded lay. A light, they realized as they started to tend those still living, that was coming from the gaping wounds of the fallen soldiers. The doctors tending the wounded soon realized that the men whose wounds emitted this glow had a noticeably higher survival rate than those that did not. Believing the glow was the result of divine providence, the light was dubbed Angel's Glow. For over 150 years, the intervention of angels was the best explanation that anyone had for what had affected the wounded men on those cold nights in April. But humans are curious creatures. And in 2001, 2 bright high school students, Bill Martin and John Curtis, with help from John's microbiologist mother, solved the mystery. The glow had been caused by a bioluminescent bacteria called Photor-Habdus luminescens. This light-emitting bacteria lives symbiotically with soil nematodes, and the pair usually attack insects. I am personally familiar with these 2 symbiotic buddies. I buy 15 million nematodes annually to inoculate my saffron beds against grubs that would eat the bulbs over the winter and spring. The nematodes, taking a bite out of the grub, would be like us walking up to a house and chomping out a corner. But the nematodes can kill the grubs because they carry this bacteria. They bite the grub, the bacteria kills it and breaks down the flesh so that both the bacteria and the nematode can consume it. The grub becomes both food and house for the pair while they breed and consume it until it's finally gone. Then the bacteria, hitching a ride in the guts of the nematodes as the nematodes disperse, looking for more grubs. Secretions from the bacteria prevent other bacteria from infecting the carcass and competing with our friendly pair for the food. Under normal conditions, this bacteria would never infect humans, as our body temperature is too warm for it to survive. But the cold conditions of the spring rains, combined with the weakened state of the soldiers, resulted in hypothermia and kept the wounds cool enough for the bacteria to survive and grow. In the 1880s, many men with wounds they could heal today would die from gangrene or other infections. But the Photor-Habdus kept other bacteria from infecting the wounds. And when the men were finally found and taken to the field hospitals, tents and blankets and general care resulted in a warming of the wounds, killing the Photor-Habdus, and those that could heal from their injuries survived. So, no miracle here, no divine providence, no intervention of angels, right? What was believed to be the intervention of angels in 1862 was just a glowing bacteria hitching a ride on a soil nematode. No miracle here. Which leaves me to wonder, just what is a miracle then? It's not a concept with any clear answer, as is common with theological terms. The personal beliefs of the person defining the term can leave you ended up with some very different definitions. Historically and philosophically, a miracle is defined as an extraordinary event that cannot be explained by natural or scientific laws and is therefore attributed to a divine or supernatural power. Clearly, by this definition, the angel's glow was a miracle. No one at the time could explain either the glow or the survival of the men. Therefore, it was attributed to a divine or supernatural power, in this case, angels. But also, by this definition, the miracle evaporated as soon as a couple of bright and curious high school kids figured out how it happened. What was a miracle in 1862, when no one could explain by any known scientific or natural laws what had occurred, suddenly stopped being a miracle in 2001. In fact, if understanding how something happens means it's not a miracle, then, well, that means pretty much that miracles don't exist, at least no permanent ones. Given enough time, we humans seem to figure out how every impossible thing that has happened was actually possible. We invented telescopes and the points of light in the sky stopped being gods. We invented microscopes and infectious diseases stopped being caused by demons. We figured out how Stonehenge was raised and how the Mayans fit together stones with no daylight in between them. We even have a damn possible explanation of why the sea parted for Moses. I don't know about you, but I rather like believing in miracles. So I'm not fond of deciding that something being a miracle requires that we don't know how it happened. You just never know when some article in Scientific American is going to take that miracle you've been drawing inspiration from ever since you were a kid, and suddenly it stops being one. Fortunately, that's not at all the only way the word miracle is defined. In traditional religious context, a miracle is a direct intervention by divine power into the natural order. This intervention causes impossible things, such as a fire line suddenly stopping, the parting of the sea, or the sudden healing of a deadly disease, to happen in the real world. This seems like a very clear and straightforward definition. It completely makes sense to me that if God interferes to save us, then that would constitute a miracle. A miracle that would always be one, because if God did it, no matter how much time passes, God still did it. Even if we figure out the mechanics, God still did it. But maybe not so useful to talk about or even think about miracles. We just never know if an occurrence was actually divinely manipulated. Whether or not we have an explanation of how it occurred, no matter how unlikely an event, no matter how beneficial to the people involved, we simply cannot actually know if any particular event involved the actual intervention by God. Or someone just got lucky. Or aliens did it. Or they only thought they were in danger. So, while we may decide that divine intervention absolutely does constitute a miracle, for the sake of discussion, we may decide to leave that criteria aside and not try to decide for our human selves if a particular event was actually aided by God. So, if we decide not to use an act of God as our working definition of a miracle, what else do we have? In casual conversation, the word is used much more broadly to describe a highly improbable, fortunate event that brings welcome consequences. If someone survives a horrific accident completely unharmed, or if a desperate situation resolves itself perfectly in the final seconds, people often call it a miracle. Even if it can technically be explained by luck, physics, or human skill. Philosophically, it represents an event so highly improbable and contrary to human experience that its occurrence challenges our understanding of reality, often causing us to believe, or at least consider the possibility, that godly intervention was at play. This is how I generally use the word. I describe, for instance, as my miracle an experience of running out of gas on a busy urban freeway with a loaded delivery truck, coasting down the nearby exit, crossing through a fortuitously green light, and rolling up to a gas pump. Okay, seriously, thanking God. In fact, it seems miraculous to me anytime something happens and I find myself responding to it by spontaneously thanking God for the help. It isn't like I can't figure out how that happened. There was an exit right in front of me with a gas pump at the bottom, combined with some good timing. And there's certainly no way to know if God had a hand in it or not. But I call it my miracle anyway. Maybe the question of a miracle is not the question of how, but the question of why. Why did I run out of gas with an off-ramp just ahead of me with a gas station at the bottom? Murphy's Law would say I would run out of gas on a long stretch of nothing with no cell service and no good shoulder to park on either. If a man is shot in the chest on the battlefield, and his companions are amazed to find him still living because the bullet was stopped by the Bible he carried over his heart, there's no discussion of the strength of the fibers and the compression of paper and the velocity of the bullet that results in a stack of paper being surprisingly effective at stopping a bullet. But rather amazement that the Bible was carried over the heart that day and that's where the bullet struck. In that case, they know the how of what stopped the bullet, but it still feels like a miracle. We might hear of a woman lifting a car off her trapped grandchild moments before the car bursts into flames. And someone might, theoretically, analyze the situation and explain that it was a combination of leverage and balance and adrenaline and determination. Does that make it not a miracle? Because even if you could measure all that and explain why a 115-pound old woman could lift that car, it would still not tell you why that unlikely combination of leverage and balance and adrenaline and determination came together that day for that woman and allowed that which looked impossible to be possible. Of course, the phrase, "it's just random chance," can be used to explain pretty much anything. If you roll a pair of dice enough times, there will come a day when you will roll 10 snake eyes in a row. It's just math. After all, people win the Mega Millions. They sure do. And it's against extreme odds, too. I joke with people that if I ever buy a lotto ticket, I never buy more than one number. Because 1 in 300,000 is just not significantly less than 2 in 300,000. Math does say that if enough tickets are bought, then someone will win. But this question is specifically the odds of me winning. Winning the Mega Millions is so statistically unlikely that surely it counts as a miracle to the people who win it. I have no idea if God influences the Mega Millions draw. But one of the side effects of the fact that we humans don't ever actually know if God was involved in something is that we never actually know that God wasn't either. So we can't know if God influenced the angel's glow at Shiloh or not. Given the sheer number of wounded, the dirty conditions, insufficient medical personnel, and the bad weather, the infection of the Fotor Habdas likely kept hundreds of men alive, possibly even thousands. And I don't know how you don't call that a miracle. especially when you consider there has only been one lone documented case of this bacteria infecting humans other than at Shiloh. One newborn infant left on the ground in cold weather in Texas. The child was found and survived, by the way. Honestly, I'm inclined to say that a miracle is anything that feels like a miracle to those that experience it. I know, not a very useful definition. But if a miracle actually is any event where God steps in to rescue someone, and we can't ever know for sure if God did or did not, then I don't know of a better way to judge. Totally okay over here with the idea that we see miracles all around us, even if most of them are nothing but good luck or fast reflexes. Or just, well, it could do nothing but work out. We just didn't know that. When I was young, like 10 or 11 maybe, I suddenly realized when a laundry load had been in the dryer for a while that I had left $20 in my pants pocket. So you can probably imagine that $20 for a 10-year-old in 1970 was a pretty big deal. And as I ran toward the house, heading toward that dryer, I prayed and prayed and prayed that my $20 had survived that ordeal. All of my experience at the time said that paper left in a pocket did not survive the washing machine. Now, I know that the paper they use to make money is pretty tough stuff. And I regularly find money in freshly washed clothes, and I think nothing of it. But when I pulled those jeans out of the dryer and I found my $20 intact, it felt like God had answered my prayer. If I had happened to have experience with washing money at the time, I would have had no concern, and there would have been no feeling of a miracle. Does that mean that no miracle happened? Does that mean that God wasn't involved just because if I had asked her, my mother could have told me that that $20 bill would have been fine? It's not like we actually know God's plan, or why God does what God does, or even what God does. But I do know that I thanked God mighty sincerely for not needing to suffer the consequences of not checking my pockets before I washed my clothes. Life lesson bought cheap. In this case, it wasn't just the survival of my cash could be readily explained, but in truth, there wasn't even ever any danger. I just didn't know it. I mean, if one were to think about it, just because an event didn't seem amazing doesn't mean that God didn't intervene on our behalf. If, instead of a boulder missing you by a hair's breadth and resulting in spontaneous bout of genuflecting, God had just kept it from falling, it would still be a miracle. You just wouldn't have a clue that it had happened, or didn't happen. Much like I would have thought nothing of my $20 surviving the wash had I understood the durability of paper money, if the doctors at Shiloh had known about the photor-Hopler's luminescence and its properties, they would have understood right away what the glow was and expected the men involved to fare better. And the idea that it was angels probably never would have crossed their mind. Which brings me back again to the idea that existence of a miracle is dependent on the knowledge of the humans witnessing it. Like I said, I'm totally okay with living in a world full of miracles. No matter how well we understand what happened, it's mighty hard for me to look at what happened at Shiloh and not call it a miracle. So, for me at least, I will claim miracle anytime I find myself spontaneously thanking God for the help. Blessed be.